2 years into our marriage, yet I still considered us newlyweds. 2 years since the day we vowed to spend forever together. My heart sank at the sight of my wife, unashamedly declaring, "I'm pregnant." The father was my boss. "We should wait to have kids. I want to enjoy our time as newlyweds." Those words from my wife when we got married echoed in my mind. My name is Ryan Kitchener. I turned 30 this year. I married my wife Susan 2 years ago. We met at work. We were in different departments, but worked for the same company. Every time we crossed paths in the hallways of our office building or in the elevator, I thought to myself, what a beautiful woman she was. When a coworker introduced us, I was so thrilled my heart did a little victory dance. I was always looking for an opportunity to talk to Susan, and I wasn't going to let this chance slip by. I watched every movie and read every book she recommended. My attempts to close the distance between us, slowly but surely, started to bear fruit. Back then, it seemed Susan had a boyfriend. But I didn't ask too much about him. I was indicating that it didn't matter to me. Even now, I'm amazed at my own tenacious efforts. Susan quit her job, by her own volition, and is now a stay-at-home wife. I'm happy that she's keeping our home safe. Susan goes to cooking and flower arrangement classes, has leisurely lunches with her friends, and lives a comfortable and relaxed life. 2 years into our marriage, around the time when our parents started hinting about wanting to have grandchildren, an unbelievable incident occurred. The busy season of overtime was over, and I was in high spirits leaving work on time. Thinking that Susan must have been feeling lonely due to my busy schedule, I bought her favorite cake on my way home. For the upcoming long weekend, we could go on a mini vacation. I picked up brochures of nearby tourist spots at a travel agency by the train station. I ordered takeout so Susan wouldn't have to worry about making dinner. I'm home. I managed to get off work early today. As I spoke to Susan while taking off my shoes at the front door, she came running from down the hall. She seemed surprised at my early return. As I explained about ordering takeout for dinner, I handed her the cake she loves. But there was something off about Susan. "Susan, is something wrong?" As I handed her my suit jacket and asked, she gave a small nod. There was a solemn look on her face. As I sat down on the living room couch, Susan took a seat in front of me. Then, she said words that I couldn't believe. "I'm pregnant, and I want us to break up." The words hit me like a blunt force to the back of my head. I could never have imagined hearing such words from Susan. Susan and I don't have any kids. She was the one who had convinced me, who wanted a child right after we got married, that it was too soon. Respecting her wish to enjoy our newlywed life a little longer, I had promised to wait for her sake. We were careful these past 2 years. So, what's this new life in her belly? I want a divorce. It's for the child. I never wanted to hear the phrase "for the child" from Susan's mouth in such a situation. I thought it would be a phrase we'd use joyfully together as a couple. Susan was looking at me expressionlessly. But it seemed her intention to divorce was firm. "Please sign this. I want a divorce, for the sake of my child." Susan laid out divorce papers with her signature already on them before me. The witnesses section was signed by Susan's parents. She had already consulted her parents. I want to know who the father is. But I couldn't afford to lose my cool here. I have my pride, too. "So, you're serious?" In response to my question, Susan gave a firm nod. After that, I only remembered concentrating hard not to let the pen shake in my hand. She carefully folded the signed divorce papers, and it seemed she had already packed her things. A large suitcase in hand, she headed for the door, and I had no words for Susan, who was about to leave. Susan didn't look back at me again. Her feelings for me were gone, it was clear from her expression. She disappeared into the twilight, pulling her suitcase behind her. All I could do was gaze at Susan's retreating figure. That night, I drank alone until I fell asleep. Because I had passed out drunk in the living room, it seemed I had caught a cold. I was hit by a headache and chills, which are different from a hangover. I called my workplace. I told them I would be taking a sick day due to poor health. Reflecting on last night, I wondered if it was all a dream. But there were the liquor bottle and that pen on the living room table. It wasn't a dream. Susan really did betray me and left. When reality hit again, my chest throbbed with pain. And I realized the saying, the cuter they are, the harder they fall, is really true. I can't believe how much I hate Susan, who I loved so much. I have to find the other man. I spent a day rummaging through the belongings Susan left behind with that thought in mind. The ring and bracelet I gave her when we were dating were still in the jewelry case. I found the wedding ring in the trash can. What was Susan thinking when she threw the ring into the trash can? Just imagining that made me feel dizzy. I spent all day looking for clues about the other man, but in the end, I only succeeded in raising my fever. Despite all this, I kept rummaging through her belongings incessantly, feeling as if I'd fall apart if I didn't stay busy. But because I was in such a state, my health didn't fully recover in a day. In the end, I ended up taking a week off from work. Somehow, when I managed to get myself back to work, my coworkers knew about my divorce. Even though I hadn't told HR yet. "How are you feeling, Ryan? You're such a softie, getting sick just because of a divorce." My direct boss, Tom Gary, strolled up to me with a smirk. Gary was always the type to nitpick and make life difficult for me. His overly pretentious demeanor, along with his sleazy behavior, were always off-putting. As I begrudgingly endured his company, I suddenly realized he mentioned the divorce. Then, it hit me, before she got married to me, Susan and Gary used to work in the same department. "Oh, didn't Susan tell you about the divorce, or was your tiny little pride too precious for that?" He sneered, and the pieces fell into place. "Are you the father of Susan's unborn child?" I asked in a low, grating voice. Gary, in a jesting tone, confirmed, "That's right." He was completely mocking me. For a moment, I didn't realize what I had done. When I came to, Gary was sprawled across the room, a toppled chair and scattered desk items around him. I felt a dull pain in my clenched fist. The ensuing chaos was like something out of a festival. Some people were helping Gary up, others were trying to restrain me. Gary, despite being hit, was laughing. He was laughing at the future trouble I had just invited. He had baited me into it. Gary is the grandson of the founder of our company. I had just punched a future company executive. Of course, I was suspended. And then, inevitably, I was fired. I became an unemployed man, dumped by his wife. My life after that was a wreck. I knew I needed to look for a job to survive. But my actions couldn't catch up with my thoughts. I started drinking during the day, and as night fell, I would start drinking all over again. I suppose this is what they call self-destructive. I had no motivation to do anything. My only consolation was that I had savings. I wanted to thank the old me for being diligent in saving money. While living such days, after about a month, a surprising visitor arrived. At first, I pretended I wasn't home. But 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Once again, I pretended not to be home. The doorbell rang again an hour later. Annoyed, I wondered who on earth could be bothering me. As I reluctantly opened the front door, I found an unfamiliar woman standing there. She stood tall, gazing at me with a piercing stare. I felt like I was being judged, and I quickly averted my eyes. May I ask your name?" I asked. The woman staring at me had a dignified appearance and a face that suggested a strong will. Suddenly I felt embarrassed about the alcohol on my breath. I hadn't even bothered to shave. "Are you the ex-husband of that woman?" she asked abruptly, nearly stopping my heart. She didn't beat around the bush. She was Gary's wife. And that woman she mentioned must have been Susan. Well, I stuttered, at a loss for words. The woman deeply bowed her head. She introduced herself as Lillian Gary. Just as I'd imagined, she was Gary's wife. The neighborhood ladies passed by, shooting me curious glances. I always found these gossip-loving folks a bit hard to deal with. "Please, come inside." I hastily invited Lillian in, trying to avoid the gossip that would inevitably spread otherwise. "Thank you," she replied, and walked into the house without hesitation. Of course, I hadn't done any cleaning at all. As I led her into the chaotic living room, she began to silently gather the trash scattered around. "I can clean that up myself," I tried to insist, but she cut me off. "We can't have a serious conversation in this mess, can we? If you're not going to help, please sit down." She snapped, so I sat up straight. I sat down on the couch and watched in stunned silence as she went about tidying up. "Why don't you go wash your face?" she suggested. I got startled by her words, and I dashed off to the bathroom. I washed my face quickly. I was shocked at the sight of myself in the mirror, as I looked like a stranger. I washed my face and shaved. I washed and combed my hair. For the first time in a long time, I felt a little bit more like a human. When I returned to the living room, the cleaning was already finished. The trash had been bagged up and set out in the hallway. "I used your kitchen," Lillian said as she offered me a cup of tea. She seemed quite reliable, for Gary's wife. "Thank you, I feel like a human again." I was surprised by how naturally my gratitude spilled out. Lillian gave me a faint smile in response to my words. But in the next moment, her smile disappeared. "My husband asked me for a divorce. He said it's because he has a child now." She cut straight to the chase. It seemed she disliked beating around the bush. "I was told the same thing by my wife. I'm already divorced." When I told her it was none of my business anymore, she let out a deep sigh. It seemed that the affairs of her husband, Gary, weren't a new occurrence. Apparently, he had resolved a previous scandal with money, and it was also with Susan. Susan took the payoff, and she immediately married me. She told me she had married as proof of ending her relationship with Gary. He had attempted to resolve it with money this time as well, but Susan wasn't budging. From Lillian's tone, I could tell she still loved Gary. She wanted to somehow get rid of Susan. "So, I get what you want to say, but you want to mend things with Gary and not get her divorce." This man had cheated on her twice with the same woman and even had a child with her. Could she still be holding on to feelings for him? When asked if she didn't want a divorce, Lillian looked a little surprised. She had an expression as if divorce hadn't even crossed her mind. "Do you really think you can start over from this point?" Even I think it's a bit mean to ask. But I found her expressions and attitude intriguing. I wanted to know what Lillian's response would be. With a small smile, she simply said, "We're married, after all." I don't know why, but I felt defeated. In the end, I asked Lillian to leave that day, agreeing to discuss it again another time. The day after Lillian's visit, Gary came over. It seemed he had heard from Lillian about her meeting with me yesterday. As a former boss, I decided to invite him into the living room. Gary looked around the living room and then laughed. Find something funny. This, Lillian cleaned up, didn't she? Gary said this with amusement in his voice. I hadn't noticed, but it seemed that Lillian's style was reflected in how she tidied up. Feeling the vibe of understanding between them irritated me. When I asked him what brought him here, Gary said he had a request for me. He wanted me to convince Lillian to divorce him, the request that left me shocked. According to Gary, Lillian can't have children. He loves children and needs an heir. The fact that Susan is pregnant was a golden opportunity. He offered me a reward for convincing Lillian to agree to a divorce and placed a thick envelope in front of me. The sight of him trying to solve everything with money made me sick. I want kids, and that's something Lillian can't give me. At these words, I lost my patience. I grabbed him by the collar, but Gary was still laughing. He probably thought he wouldn't get punched twice. Just as I was about to swing my fist, a soft hand gently grasped my raised fist. Is my husband worth punching? Lillian said she had followed Gary. You left the front door wide open. That's careless. As she scolded me, I involuntarily lowered my fist, and I muttered okay. My grip on Gary's collar loosens, momentum extinguished. So you want a child, huh? Lillian murmurs as she looked at Gary. As he nods, she pulls out some documents from her bag. They were divorce papers. Are you satisfied now? Lillian smiled as she offered the papers to Gary. Her smile was stunningly beautiful, almost eerie. It looked as if it could forgive anything and everything, yet at the same time, it was as if it could send someone straight to hell. As Gary takes the divorce papers, his fingers lightly trace over the back of her hand. It felt like I've seen something I shouldn't have, and I quickly averted my eyes. Thank you. Gary leaves these words behind, swiftly striding towards the front door. We're enemies now, aren't we, Gary? Better be ready. Gary waved without turning around to her words. It seemed that he had accepted her declaration of war. Once Gary was out of sight, Lillian turned back to me. Shall we lick our wounds together? But first, let's have our revenge. We both separately demanded compensation from Gary and Susan. They're well off. No matter how much we demand, they're likely to pay. I asked my lawyer to proceed with all matters simultaneously. Because I wanted them to suffer, even if just a little. This would be just a bit of payback, child's play, really. After demanding the compensation, Susan finally came crying. It seems Gary will pay his own part, but he won't pay Susan's portion. They're not married yet, so it's only natural, but it seems there's more to it. At a meeting between the four of us, Gary started saying that I was also to blame for Susan's affair. He claimed it was a result of making her feel lonely due to my constant work. You sure have a knack for blowing smoke, don't you? It won't work on me. What Lillian pulled out was a report on Gary's personal investigation. The investigation had apparently been requested by Gary's parents. Susan and Gary had been involved before my marriage to her, and at one point, Susan had accepted a settlement to sever ties. However, behind the scenes, the relationship continued. Apparently, my marriage to her was suggested by Gary as a camouflage. I love my work and I'm a bit insensitive. For them, having an insensitive husband was very convenient. Moreover, since I was working with Gary, they could always keep an eye on me. The report Gary's parents had put together by spending a considerable amount of money was unbelievably detailed. Lillian reads through the contents in a steady voice. The color drains from Gary and Susan's faces. The first to break was Susan. She starts to scream amidst her tears. Stop it now. It's not good for the baby if you stress yourself out so much. And a reprimand, Susan flinched. Being stared down by Lillian's icy eyes, Susan fainted on the spot. Gary, panicking, cradled Susan in his arms, to which Lillian smiled. Already surrendering, that's a shame. I believe Lillian truly loved Gary. Love and hate are two sides of the same coin. The deeper the love, the deeper the hate. It seemed Gary understood that too. In the end, I had no role in the discussion, and the meeting ended with Lillian dominating the conversation. At the end, Lillian laughed at me, saying, "That's it." Afterwards, the reason for my divorce became well known at work. I was the one who had leaked it to my coworkers. The company wanted to cover it up, but it was too late. In the end, Gary was sidelined at work and had no place in his family. After remarrying, Susan is struggling with in-law issues. It seems that Gary's parents, who liked Lillian, are harshly treating Susan, who took Lillian's place after driving her out. I think it serves her right. When everything about the alimony and other issues had been settled, I invited Lillian for a coffee. She told me about her current situation, working at a friend's company while living alone. I can't have children, so I need to be self-sufficient. I don't feel the same fear I did back then when I see Lillian speaking with such a sincere expression. Your reason for being independent seems a bit off. I disagreed with Lillian. She looked at me, surprised. It was the first time I had strongly insisted on something. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding ring. It was proof she hadn't forgotten Gary. Summoning my courage, I decided to give her the words I had been practicing since last night. I don't mind that. She looked at me with a puzzled expression. I took a deep breath. Then I asked her to wait until I found a job, as I was applying to be Lillian's boyfriend. Lillian and I will definitely work out. We understand each other's pain. I will never hurt you. From my expression, she seemed to understand that I wasn't joking. She looked down once and then chuckled. I'm quite a handful, you know. I am well aware of that, I replied. I gently traced the back of her hand with my finger. It seemed like she was recalling something as she squinted her eyes. She gently brushed off my finger and then took off her ring. I felt it was her way of breaking away from her past. Then, she lightly touched my hand. Her delicate fingers traced the back of my hand. It felt like her love was flowing into me from her fingertips. I'll make you happy, so please wait. Lillian laughs as if she's bursting with joy. I swore in my heart to always protect that smile. What did you think? Subscribing to the channel will encourage us to produce more. See you in the next video.